there's so much good stuff that came out in 2024. And it was funny because at the beginning of the year, people were like, "Oh, it's going to be a quiet year for gaming." It's like,
they just came off a crazy.
Yeah, they came off a crazy year. It's like 2020, and it wasn't. Hi, my name is John Epler. I'm the creative director for Dragon Age: The Veilguard.
Hi, I'm Billy Basso. I'm the creator of Animal Well.
I'm Nick Chilano, art director of Diablo 4.
We were talking about it in the other room. I'm talking about it for me, Stalker 2. I've been waiting 15 years for this game. It came out. I'm so excited it came out. It's a lot of fun. It's also probably the most stressful game I've ever played in a good way. So
I played a lot of, Helldivers was probably my big game. I was really I love sandbox open world games, all player experience games. But the way that they were able to make it cinematic at the same time, like everything that happened was so cool. It was like a movie. It was like Jerry Bruckheimer. You're just like what the hell's going on? But you're laughing, you're having a good time, you're killing aliens. It was awesome.
Well, it's like you said, the stories that come out of that game. And I mean, we talked about a couple other games too, but like that for me is what I love about those types of multiplayer games, is the kinds of stories that afterwards you sit down with your friends, like, remember that time that I did this crazy thing? And you're like, oh yeah, but remember this other time. You get the, and I mean, and the best parts of those games are when you do something really, really bad in the game, like you mess up big time, because those tell some of the best stories. Like, I mean, we talked about PUBG a little bit, and like that was one where I have so many stories about the time that I drove a Jeep off a cliff and just wiped out the entire team when it was us and one other person at the end of the game.
Yeah. For me, I have not played either of those games. That's why I'm sitting here quiet. But I think there's a lot of good stuff. The things that come to mind are probably Astrobot and UFO 50. Those are like that I've probably sunk in hundreds of hours into this year, just because it's 50 games. It's kind of self-evident why it would take so long. But yeah, UFO 50 in particular is just like kind of incredibly impressive to me. And I've like described it the past before. It's like seeing a really talented like illustrator's like sketchbook where they can just like whip something out like really fast, or like just so confident in their ability to do so. And it feels like the game design form of that, where it's like, wow, there's like 50 games here, and each one of them is like pretty solid and like well balanced. And if people don't know, if they're playing UFO 50 and they haven't tried out Pilot Quest yet, it's kind of like this almost like cookie clicker, like idle game. Your like resource gathering happens in the background while you play the other 49 games. So it's
that's cool.
You got to start that one first.
And
then while you're exploring all the other games, at least you're kind of like making progress in something. But
nice.
Well, I love that you talk, like I haven't played UFO 50 yet, but I love that idea of just a bunch of different experiences that you can kind of cycle through, because I think, we've all made games, obviously, and part of the challenge is always you want to be able to try different stuff, but at a certain point you have to lock down what you're doing, lock down where you're going. So that opportunity to just try a bunch of different stuff, I'm gonna have to pick it up when I get home for sure.
Yeah, totally worth it. Yeah, it's probably like the best value that in games that's like ever been available to people, I think. Like I like structured Animal Well, and like I tried to make it like a game that accommodated a lot of different ideas when I was working on it, and because I really just want to be able to put in whatever I'm like excited about at the time. But even then it's hard. It's still like, it still has to be a 2D platformer and apply, like work within this physics system. And yeah, to be able to just make like pretty much anything you want, that sounds really fun.
Well, you said, like, there always has to still be that cohesiveness to the experience, even if you have the opportunity to play with a bunch of ideas. Part of a lot of games is just that feeling of one experience that carries you from beginning to end. And I mean, yeah, but UFO 50, like I said, haven't tried it. Now it's on my list. So
you were talking a little bit about like, you had to make a 2D side scroller. Do you enjoy working on those constraints?
I think so. I think I enjoy constraints, like in general, like, whether it be like the game's resolution or color palette, or like, I just made some like hard decisions early on, like the map's only going to be this big, and I made it so like the room index was just like 1 byte. So there can only be 256 rooms in the game, and I'm like, I have to re-architect the whole engine if I want to go beyond this. But then that made me like really push the game in a more interesting direction, where I had to keep adding like stuff to the background. And like,
we were into that too, because we have this isometric game, and you have to kind of look at it very differently, at that at that view, and you got to kind of really understand what's important on screen, what you really want the player to see, the experience you want them to take through, and you have to really start to like understand like, well, these things don't matter, and these constraints are actually good because you can make sure your highs are high and you don't have to worry about the lows.
And they're like, what looks good at that perspective?
They're very different,
like a whole
right?
class of things that just don't read that.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, we can't do.
And I'm sure on the 2D side scroller too, you've probably got that same problem with the whole like what's in the background, how you're moving through it, pace you're moving, sideways across the screen. Like, what do you want people to really, really recognize, and how fast can they recognize it, right?
Yeah, totally. There was like, I remember certain animals I would try to draw. Like I wanted like a little mouse or something. But I'm like, the resolution's too low that you can't even tell what it is. So I either like make it like unrealistically large, or I just come up with a different idea.
Yeah. How about what were some of the challenges on Dragon Age?
Where do I start? I mean, honestly, I think the biggest challenge is just trying to pull this game together 10 years after the last one.
Big game.
It is a big game, and I think for us especially, just the number of times in production that we just had to kind of let ideas go because they weren't working, they weren't coming together. And I mean, people like to talk about like, oh, it's because of, here's the specific reason why they didn't do what I want. But I mean, ultimately, game dev is all about a bunch of decisions. And I would say probably the biggest challenge for me, I've never done a director role before. So I was creative director for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Jumping into a series with so many expectations, but also trying to make those hard calls like, okay, we can't do X, we can't do Y, but we can do Z, and trying to figure out what the best option for that is at every time, while still, because I think the thing with games, and especially one in a series like Dragon Age, you want to match player expectations. You want to give them what they expect, but you also want to make a game that you and your team want to make. And Dragon Age, I mean, the leadership team had completely cycled. Like, very few people who were in the leadership team were the leadership team before. Yeah. So we just end up in this place where it's like, I could try to make the exact same game that was made before. I'm not going to do a good job of that because it's not where my influences come from. Like, I know Dave Gator, Mike Laidlaw, they were hugely influenced by Dungeons and Dragons. You can see it in Baldur's Gate, you can see it in the original Dragon Age. I love Dungeons and Dragons, but like, I grew up in I'm 10, 12 years younger than them. So I had a very different experience of what I drew influence from. Like, Ultima 7 is one of my favorite games of all time. Like, I talk about how I can talk about Stalk for hours. I can talk about Ultima 7 for hours as well. But you start having to figure out, like, what can we keep and what, if we try to keep, is going to feel unauthentic.
There's also that thing, too, when you get into the director role where you're making decisions now that they're going to take months to see if they work. It's not as quick as, like, when you were, like, maybe, more hands-on making actual assets or things of that nature. So
when I was a cinematic designer, it's like I go in, I make a scene, I look at it, I'm like, it's a great scene. And even on this project, I did some writing. Writing was easier because I'm like, okay, I write a scene, I write a dialogue. Okay, yeah, I like this, it feels good. Creative director, like, yes, we should proceed with this mission. Also, that's going to be a year and a half before you see anything. It's like, well, I hope I made the right call here.
And you're hoping, you're like, oh man, like, and you're watching it, you're watching it come together, you're keeping it aligned, but you're also entrusting a lot of people to. That's the big thing for me is like, what I was learning in director was kind of like, I want to bring clarity to something. Yeah. But I also got to make sure that I can flex into like what they kind of find by going for a target. So I can't be so strict on it. Like, it has to be this thing.
Walking that line is such a challenging thing because you want to make sure that you're giving proper direction. But you also want to make sure that they feel invested. Yeah. The team feels ownership.
You get a better product that way.
You get a better product, exactly. But sometimes you find like you've left too much one place and then you've gone too deep on another one. And you're like, oh shoot, these two things don't work together anymore. But I mean, I think making games in general is always challenging. And like, I'm sitting here talking about our challenges, but like, again, talking about Stalker 2, they made that game in the middle of a war. Yeah. And
unbelievable.
The fact that it came out this year, and it came out, again, in my mind, it's the best buy game of the year. It's incredible to see how well they were able to keep to that vision and keep that.
One of the things that I was really excited about with Helldivers was I felt like they found this on a lot of vectors, not just in the game, but on social media and everything. Like their vibe, their fantasy, the whole like, for liberty and all that stuff was so good. And it was just like, it hit all the things I liked. It was cinematic. Mm-hmm. It was sandboxy. It was these moments were epic. The I failed, I feel bad wasn't as harsh as like a Tarkov or something else. Also, it was super like meme worthy, which I thought was like really amazing. It was awesome. And like, so like there must have been about like a month where it was just like every reel was a Helldivers reel. And it was just infectious at that point, and you couldn't really deny it. Because I remember at first when I was going to play it, I played it and I was like, I don't know if this has depth. And then it was like 2 nights later, it was just, I played for like 4 hours, 300 hours in. I'm like, oh my God.
The exact same experience where I played it and I'm like, oh, my friends were online. I'm like, I played a little bit with some, and it was fine. Like, it was fun to play with randos. The moment I got to play with a full squad of my friends and just like us on Discord giving each other crap, you know, but again, role playing, you know, doing all these, you start getting to the character. You're like, all right, you know, we gotta bring these aliens a taste of liberty. You're just like, and like I said, I talked to you earlier, but like trying to frantically set off a bomb as your friends are covering your back. You're just
so
like,
good.
And every time you mess up the inputs, you're like, oh my God, I'm letting the team down.
Yeah, I feel like my main experience with Helldivers 2, which I haven't played, but it was just seeing how like upset everybody got that you needed the PlayStation login. But then, and it sounded like, oh, the game is dead. This is gonna ruin it. Like Sony messed up so bad. But now it's like one of the most nominated games for Game of the Year, and like people still that seemed to like not have mattered.
What was funny about that, we were talking about it at work, and it was kind of like, you know, their whole thing of like, you have this big objective and everyone's kind of going towards it virtually in the game, and then they trained everyone to do the same thing against Sony almost. So it was like everyone get together and like show them you don't want this to happen. It was like, you know, it was interesting. But yeah, you know, we make a live service game. Live service games are it's so interesting to go from like you're shipping a game and then you turn in a live service and it's a completely different beast and you have completely different objectives. So, you know, working at Blizzard and on the games we've worked on, like I was like, oh yeah, I see what you're going through. You know, it's tricky to try to like tune and adjust and make things better and keep engagement going. And, but you know, they didn't give up. And they're still, and I played it a couple weeks ago. We took a break from it. I played it. And I was just like, oh, magic's still there.
Well, I think it's interesting though what you talk about too, because I think everyone who makes games, there's a lot of empathy for everyone else who makes games, because it's just such a challenging process. And like you said, you run into the same problems. You see someone else out there writing the same issue. And I think there's definitely some people are like, oh, you're probably, I'm like, no, I want everyone to, like, if in my ideal world, everyone would be succeeding, everyone would be doing well, because the more games there are out there. But you can't help but feel empathy when you see someone else going through the same challenges you went through. And you're just like, I've been there. And you always want to be like, send them an email and be like, hey, you don't know me. I'm a completely random person, but I got you. Like, I get you here.
Yeah.
Yeah, how did it feel like going back to sort of making like a kind of a hardcore, dedicated single player game?
I mean, honestly, it felt good. Yeah, it was to say that the process and this dev process in this game was challenging. I mean, it's no secret we were multiplayer at one point, and part of the challenge then was just trying to keep as much of the single player alive while there was conversations going on about what the game could be or what the game should be. And then that day where they finally said, hey, we're moving to be a full single player RPG again. It was just like, oh, thank God. I don't know how to do story in a mass multiplayer game. I mean, we tried with Anthem, and I think parts of it landed, but like, you've got what? Final Fantasy 14 does a really good job of it. Like, I think they are right now probably the gold standard of story, but they do it because they basically ignore that they're a multiplayer game. Like, the story is like, you are the warrior of light years, and also here's some other people. Sometimes they'll help you
at the same
exactly.
time.
Yeah. There was a line, and I think it was Stormblood. It was like, you're about to fight a boss, and like, yeah, and if you could find 7 of your closest friends to help you out, that'd be great. And like, okay, you guys don't even care that you're multiplayer at this point.
But like, you know, I think, you know, sometimes I feel like people get caught up in that, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh, you know, there's this, it's got to be grounded or connected. Really, we can't have any loopholes or any, like, you know, shortcuts or any, like, you know, it's everything's got to connect. And you're like, I don't know. Like, sometimes the players just want to play a game and experience with their friends, and those little nuances or little things that can trip you up don't actually matter.
Well, that was a lot of the conversations early on, and I, you know, disagreements I got into was like, oh, what if, you know, the shared world? I'm like, people don't care. People just want to go through the story and have their friends. Like, if you want to do this, they just want to go through the story with their friends nearby so they can have like these shared experiences. Baldur's Gate, you know, does multiplayer, and it does it in a way that clearly they don't care about that. And that's good. Because again, players don't care. I think sometimes as devs, we get so caught up in what we think is important, what we think needs to happen.
Yeah.
But in reality, again, if you want to play a game multiplayer, people aren't going to care that the story is a little bit weird, or hey, I didn't make that choice, because that's not why they're playing the multiplayer. The reason people play story games in single player and the reason they play them in multiplayer are two very different motivations.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think it's just like generally it seems best when teams kind of like develop expertise in like a certain style of game, or it's the kind of game that they really want to play themselves. So like, you know, Blizzard is really good at making these kind of like live service games and kind of pioneered a lot of it. And I was like happy to hear that the new Dragon Age just was single player. I was like, yeah, everyone play to their strengths.
Yeah.
Well, because people join studios or join teams to make the kind of game that team has made or that the studio had. And like, that was, you know, always a conversation we had is like, how many people are here to make a multiplayer live service game versus how many people are here to make another single player story game. So
yeah, because I think that happened with Naughty Dog. Like there was like rumored that the next Last of Us was going to be like a live service multiplayer game.
They wanted to add that what was the co-op mode they had in there? The
Factions.
PvP factions.
Yeah.
Which I love factions. I played a lot of it.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. But you know, you have to ask yourself at some point, like, I don't know what they did, but it's kind of like, you know, what is the main thing you're trying to do? How much you like? What are you really trying to make here, and where are your resources going? And is one hurting the other potentially? And like those are hard questions.
Yeah, and there's also like just tools and tech that you build up. Like,
they need different tools and tech, right?
Yeah. A studio, like I used to work at NetherRealm, and they like had a custom branch of Unreal that was like really good at making fighting games. And there was always talk like, oh, maybe they'll make like an action adventure game at some point. But it's like, no, everything in their pipeline was geared towards like creating characters and like getting two people to face each other on screen and make that really well. So, and then they were extremely efficient like at doing that. So yeah, I think like once you start investing in a style of game, like not only are you like excited to work on it, but you just get better at doing it too.
Well, and I think another game that does this spectacularly well is all the Yakuza games, and like a Dragon. They are making versions of the same game every time, but they do such a good job with it that like, yeah, of course I'm gonna pick it. Like there's a new one coming out next. I'm gonna buy that. I bought Infinite Wealth. I bought The Man Who Erased. I love both of them, but part of it's because they, you know, RGG has decided this is the game we're going to make. These are the types of game we're going to make. And they've just stuck with it. And I think, again, people sometimes, that's what not every game needs to come out and completely reinvent the genre and reinvent games. They just need to be fun and good. And yes, we were talking earlier, I know what's coming in Infinite Wealth. I am so excited because that's what I want out of these games. I know I'm going to get what I want. And
I think Space Marine did that really well.
Space Marine did a fantastic job.
The fantasy of being a Space Marine, hitting those iconic moments, bringing that world like kind of to the players. It's a deep world. There's a lot there, and they did a really good job. Like me and my group of friends beat the story, and we had a good time playing it. And I felt like it was like the right length. It was really good. Mm-hmm. It was really good for what it was and what they delivered. And our experience playing it was really, really well. We didn't really play a lot of the operations stuff that they did, but to your point, like leaning into what they're good at and knowing what they are and like kind of like doubling down on that they did a really good job. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we had a good time playing that game. Technically, I was most impressed with how they got so many monsters on screen, and then how they also kind of like gamified it in certain moments, and I didn't care. You know, like I remember going up on this like tower and you gotta like shoot down all the bats that are on this thing, like because they're blocking the signal or something like that. And it's like you can see how the wave comes in, they spin around it, they leave, they swap out the assets. Like, you can kind of see it, but it's like it doesn't matter because the fantasy was there, right? Hundreds of thousands of bats.
Well, that's honestly another great point too. Is I think Fidelity gets so we worry so much about Fidelity, and like we need to this needs to be, and like players will forgive so much if it feels right, if it feels good. Mm-hmm. Nobody, and again, I'm going to go back to every Yakuza game has used the exact same animation for when a new wave joins a fight. You got the guy coming and doing this, you got the guy doing, and it's literally the same exactly same camera, exactly. I don't care. I love it because like that's what I'm looking for. And so
anything is like kind of charming.
That's you start
recognizing the pattern. You're like, okay.
Well, you know, there's the Bioware turn that we had for like 10 years where every time you left a conversation, it's the exact same right turn and the stage right. And it's like, you know, I kind of, and we didn't have it in the Veilguard, and I kind of miss it sometimes because like, you know, like I said, there's charm to it.
Yeah. We, it's interesting because it's like when you were talking about like the Fidelity stuff, like one of the things on Diablo a long time ago, we worked with a combat designer. He was on another project, but he came from Street Fighter. And so we pivoted a lot of, so I came up through the animation path, but we pivoted our animation in Diablo to be basically a fighting game. So we took all the traits that like Street Fighter or fighting games did, where it's like you're cutting frames. It's really all about where's the contact frame, where's your interrupt frame. And we started to like slice up our animations like a fighting game would. And it just made combat feels so responsive and intuitive. And so it was like this outside thing came in, but it was, we had to have that moment of like, oh, this is going to come at a cost of fidelity, but we're okay because the feel of it is just so good. And that, I mean, this was 17 years ago or something like that, and it's just been the DNA of like the combat in Diablo for forever.
There's things like that where you just like the player likes kind of knowing how the game works, or like knowing the rules of the game more explicitly, and when things are like so high fidelity that can get blurred out, and the game can kind of just feel, I don't know, kind of mushy. Being able to like have like the state machine in your head of like what's happening is like, it can be very satisfying. I think
there are games I played like in the past where, and as an animator, I'm like, you would think I'd want to look at all these beautiful animations, but I'm sitting there going like, stop moving. Like, let me, I just want to do the thing. But like, stop doing this animation. Okay, cool. But I want to go. Like, I want my button input to do something on the screen.
That's me in cutscenes. I was like, oh, you're a writer and you used to do Cinemax. I'm like, I skip, like, I read the dialogue and then I skip. It's not because I don't love the work. And there's definitely cutscenes where you sit down and you watch the whole thing. But like, anytime that it's like, okay, this was definitely done systemically and procedurally, I'm going to watch it for a bit, but also I just need the information from what they're saying. And it's not because I don't love it, but it's because I know what parts of the game I want to engage with the most.
Oh, I mean, the funny story. I can't remember which WoW expansion it was, but I basically put this mod in that auto skipped all the story. So because, I have a kid, I go to work, I go home. I just want to like kind of get into the meat and potatoes of it. I want my loot. I want to beat the content. And I got to the raid and I was like, why is this person bad? I had no idea what was going on. I'm like, why are we here? What are we doing? Everyone's like, did you? I'm like, no, I auto skipped everything.
Well, I lost all contact for that.
But whatever. Where's my sword?
Yep.
I feel like either make the story really good or just have no dialogue at all. That's like, I feel like just don't put mediocre like filler stuff in the game.
I think it's got to land at the right spots. Yeah. Honestly, for me, like, I think you need story. I think you need lore. I think you need things that connect you. But I think like depending on the game you're making, I think you really just need to know where to put it so that your player's experience doesn't feel interrupted, slowed down, or like they're got to go through a chore, right?
Yeah. I think there's like, you have to be in the right state of mind. Like, I think it's like if you want to read a book, you kind of plan that in your schedule, and you're like, okay, I'm in the right mood. I'm gonna sit down and I'm gonna read this book. But if you go to play like an action adventure game and you don't care about the story, you just want to have some fun, but then all of a sudden like these like, huge conversations start like get interrupted.
Well, you have those moments, right? Like if you know your game, you're like, hey, I'm going to go out, I'm going to like push through all this content. And I think, games like, God of War did this, or Destiny, like you have this thing that can vehicle to tell you story while you're out there. So you like, God of War had the, what's his name's head on your back. Destiny's got the ghost, right? Yep. So you can go out and you can just push through content. You can get your updates. You can get your information. Monster Hunter does this. Like the trainer's talking to you while you're out there, giving you updates. But it doesn't really interrupt. That's the best. And then that there's always going to be these moments where it's like, oh, I got to go back to town. I'm going to go through and I'm going to do all my chores now. I'm going to go ahead and like salvage stuff and go to the blacksmith and then grab some quests. I'll get my story now.
It's funny you talk about that too, because one of the reasons I envy, sci-fi versus fantasy is you use radio. It goes on the radio. You don't have to stop the game. You can just do that. Whereas, and we were actually talking, or some of the earliest DA4 conversations, like, is it going to feel too weird if you have like a magic radio? Like, okay, that's probably a step too far, but it's also super helpful for exactly what you're saying. I don't want to pull the player out of the experience to deliver exposition. So what are the tools that you can use to do that? But I think the other side of it too is just, to your point, you go into a game with certain expectations, and when the game doesn't match them in specific ways, Elden Ring is a great, Shadow of the Earth Tree has a lot of dialogue, but it's always delivered in ways that you can largely ignore it. And, they're known for how much of their lore is in item descriptions and And I think it would be really weird. And I mean, the few times that it did happen was like a long conversation in Elden Ring. I think the first time you go to the Land of Shadow, and you've got what's her name at the Mikla's dangling arm, and she's telling you,
Oh yes,
I'm like, okay, just I get it. You know, gotta go there. There's bad stuff. I need to go. I want to go and hit things with my sword because I've heard nothing but good things about this expansion.
but they do a good job of putting it in a position though where you can like, if you want to slow down and find it and explore and look for it, you can. If you don't want to, you don't have to.
What's the name of the one character? Egon. The first time you meet him, he's lying in the middle of the road. He's just like clearly just been absolutely messed up by something. And then you meet him again. And then finally when you're fighting Bale and he's in the background just chewing the scenery. And I'm like, I love this character. I love how I made sure to play the fight so he didn't die specifically because I wanted to see hear the entire thing. But that's, again, it's an example of like they put it in the right place. You're fighting this giant dragon. You know, there's clearly a history there and it just feels right in the moment. And I think that, you know, one of the things that, you know, FromSoft always does well is they put it in the right place. I think Bloodborne is still the best example. And I say that because, you know, guy with a Bloodborne tattoo, obviously I love that game, but that's one of the things I love about those games specifically.
Yeah, I think that's some of my like favorite way I think of doing world building and story, just the way FromSoft does it. Like I love to play Elden Ring or any of their games while like listening to audiobooks or podcasts. So, you know, you could just like play them for like hours and hours and there's like almost no dialogue or like you don't really have to read anything. You could just be in the world and if there is a cutscene, it's like, okay, I'll pause it. Or like,
well, they world build so well just in their set pieces and like all of it like supports their main, like whether it supports the area you're in or the story of that character in that part or the bigger, but like, you know, when you're in that world, like you're saying, you don't need a lot of dialogue because you're picking up so much information from just
again, to talk about Bloodborne, as I will always do if given even the slightest chance to do so. When you beat Rom the Vacuous Spider and then the blood moon rises and everything changes, that is to me still one of the best moments of all time in gaming because it tells you everything you need to know about the world you thought it was and the world that it is now without a single, I don't think there's a single line of you there. It's just, you know, the moon is suddenly bloodied. You go back to Yharnam and suddenly everything is worse. There's, you know, the amygdalas everywhere. Like, okay, I get it. This is a completely screwed up world.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, and it's hard to do. It's hard to like do the environmental storytelling stuff, and you have to like. There's not like a formula you can follow to do it. You can't just like block out a list of tasks and work to do.
But like the item descriptions like really help because it like supports this loop, right? Like they want you to explore, they want you to find things, and then when you find it, like they know that that's like the fish hook. So then they put like a lot of context there because you found this item. You're like, oh hey, my time was worth what I did. I spent 3 hours exploring this world. I found this awesome thing, and now you have a bunch of information because they kind of locked you in and got you invested a little bit. So now you're going to read it. You know, because you're like, oh, like what is this? You know, blah blah. And then I also think Elden Ring did a really good job, and same with Shadow, with making you want to go outside of the game and look online and start to look for things people are doing or finding. They did a really good job of going like, back in the day you go to GameFAQs or whatever it was, but this was like the new version of that where you're like, look, all these builds, people are finding stuff. Where is it? What are they doing?
Well, I mean, you got to call out, you know, VodiVidia does those long bore videos, and I have 100%. I'm doing some cleaning or something, and I need to have something going on. I watch those videos, and he does such a good job explaining it. But From does such a good job of leaving those clues out there for him to put together.
Yeah. My Elden Ring experience is like play the game. I'll probably get stuck on a boss. Then I'll like watch a YouTube video like with some cheese strategy, and then I'll watch like a lore video, and then I'll go back and I just like get in this cycle where I'm like really, really like all consumed in the world.
It took me a while to get into From Software games, but my buddy once told me, he was just like, if you can cheese it, do it because the game is going to cheese you. Yeah, and I was like, okay. And it was like I remember how it was Dark Souls 3. I think it was where you're on the bridge and there's the giant. There's like a giant boss that's on the bridge, and he just like walked off and fell off and died. And I was like,
it feels good.
Yeah, I was like, I'll take it, I guess, you know. But that was the moment where I was like, okay, I get it now. Yeah, it's cool.
There's that one dragon, or I don't even. It's like the big tree slug monster that's like it's just in a whole like lake of poison.
Yeah, so
and
like it's
completely, and and I would just like aggro it, like run to the bounds of where it can't get you, and then I would like shoot a couple arrows at it, and then it would like, stand there and then retreat back to its like spawn location, and then I would like heal up for the poison, and then I'd go do it again, and it took me like 40 minutes to like beat it this way, but I did, and it gets extremely like dramatic and nerve-wracking because they're like they're down to their last 5% of health, and you're like, God damn, if I slip up once, it's gonna like one hit me,
exactly.
kill me. And I've invested so much time in this horrible strategy. So it's still really rewarding when you pull it off. Like I could have just probably gone and like leveled up a little bit more and came back and fought in 10 minutes. But
That's funny.
We were talking earlier about the final boss of the Retreat DLC, and I 100% cheesed it. I'm like, okay, giant shield, bleed spear. I'm just going to spend the next 20 minutes just poking this guy, because I tried it probably for 3 hours with, at that point, I've been using the dual swords from, what's her name? Renna. And I was working great for everyone, even beat Mesmer like that. But as soon as I got through, I was like, nope, I am getting absolutely bought. I can do phase 1, but I end phase 1 with like 1 health put with 1.
it does add that flashbang attack that literally just like whites out the whole screen, and you're like, yeah, you have no chance. How are you?
I bought an OLED TV like a week before I played. Like, oh, this is what HDR does.
That literally blinds you. So
Yeah, it's funny.
You need to cheese it.
Kind of thinking ahead a little bit, we were talking a little bit before about next year, and I was just kind of like really excited for Monster Hunter. We were kind of talking about, I don't know if do you play a lot of
I've
Monster
been
Hunter?
like wanting to get into Monster Hunter for the past like 15 years, and just I've been kind of like on the fence about it. I want which Monster Hunter do I start with? I'm kind of like
World.
a purist, and I like to start with the first one if I can. But
There's so much Monster Hunter though.
I love Monster. I love Monster Hunter as a series. I played most of them. I don't think I played the first one. I will say World was the first one where I'm like, oh, they want me to have fun. Okay. And I mean that like not that the other ones aren't fun, but you kind of have to find your fun. Whereas World is like, hey, we understand there's a lot of density here. Here you go. Here's some stuff to get you started. And I think I looked the other day. I put like 160, 170 hours into that one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wild's going to be the same thing, guaranteed. I'm already planning my build. I've already got my group together of people. But
yeah. I would say World as well. It's a grindy game by nature. It's good, but I think World just covers it up in the kind of experience way better. Okay. And the grind, the feel of the grind happens way later. So I think you can just like live in that world and have fun in it a lot longer. Whereas like some of the older ones, it was like the grind happens like you're like, oh my god.
Second monster you're fighting like, okay, now you need to spend the next 20 minutes gathering plants to build potions. So I'm like, no, I can't.
So funny. I actually I tried to start playing the original Phantasy Star on the system last year, and it's been a while since I played an RPG where it's like you go out into the world and you encounter like just a bug. It's like a mosquito that's like one of the random enemy encounters, and it will like kill you in like 2 hits, and then you lose all your progress and die. So it's like, oh my god, I actually have to grind. I have to like use everything I got to kill this mosquito, and then go back to town, heal up fully, save, then go back out,
try to get 2 mosquitoes.
And I'm like, this is insane. But I was like, if you get in the right headspace, you're like, this game, I'm gonna do everything I can to cheese it, and I'm gonna have no fun at all. But I'm gonna like prove it wrong by like making progress, despite all the odds. I can kind of get into that, so I'm okay if a game is like kind of obnoxiously like unfriendly from the beginning.
We had that in Valheim when we first got out to the like the further lands where there were the little flying bugs and they were like one shot you. It's the same thing. We were like, what the heck? We're like, geez, so we had to go back, we had to gear up and go out there. We get through 3 of them, then we die again, and you're just trying to get farther enough in so you could put like a base down so I could just spawn there.
I had to corpse run so many times about Valheim because of those bugs, because they're like, okay, I'm there, I've got my body, and then you hear exactly, and you're like, oh god, this is not good. And then because you're trying to get your body with these things still flying around, every time you're like, I can creep, and then you're out of stamina. You're like, well, that's it. I know this is gonna so you like keep like leapfrogging like 20 meters at a time closer to base until finally you got back into the swamp. You're like, okay, they can't hurt me here.
Yeah, that was so we were talking about this earlier, but that was another game I played this year that I actually really liked was Enshrouded. So it's open world crafting, survival building. It's voxels, but it looks really. They did a really good job of like kind of making the voxels not feel like they're voxels, and had a really good loop. And we played through it all. And in my mind, it was kind of that thing where it was like, oh, this is like a version, like a Valheim version 2 kind of. Like it's got a nice look to it. It's aesthetically really pleasing, but it's got like a deeper system and like kind of combat model that I think really lent itself well. And it was just awesome because like the first video I saw, I kind of had heard about the game and we like those games, but then someone put a video out where they basically built their base as like a hobbit hole in like a hill because it's voxel, so they just like destroyed it all. And I was like, I want to do that.
That's amazing.
I'm the guy when we play where I go out and we grind and we get material stuff, but I'm also the one who's like, my base has to look nice.
Oh.
So, when they did the Hobbit Hall, I was like, oh, I'm going to spend like 5 nights in a row just like building out my little nook and getting my circular door to fit right, putting plants where I want.
So that was me this year with Sons of the Forest. My friend and I, we've been playing, like we played Green Hell, we played the Forest, but Sons of the Forest, we've spent, most people are like, this game is only 35 hours. I look at my play time, it's like 250 hours. Almost all of that has been spent building, and we're just like making these incredibly detailed.
Yeah.
My friend is much better than me. Like she's like, okay, I've got this cool design. I'm like, look, I built a tower. It's like, that's great. Over here, I've got like a mansion with like a foyer and stuff like that. But it's just so much fun. And again, I love the satisfaction of doing that while also having to deal with like occasionally there's enemies that attack.
Yes.
Occasionally a giant worm monster comes over and tries to destroy your base. And I think it's a combination of those two. But yeah, like survival crafting games, I am way too into.
Yeah, well, that's the moment too where like, it kind of supports. Like I have a friend who's like super into min-maxing. He's really all about, he's an engineer, so he's all about like, I got to figure out how to get the max output of my plants. I have another buddy, he wants to go explore and kind of like find stuff. And, I kind of mix in with a lot of it. But it's really cool. You can kind of go off and do your things and it come together for like a big objective. But it's all happening together. So you're in this place doing this stuff as a group, but you have your own kind of like solo ways to play. We're just chatting. It's like a social thing. It's cool.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think when it comes to games like that, I almost get anxious when there's like too much creativity because I want to like funnel all my creative energy into like making my own game.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, I could see how you would spend like thousands of hours playing this. I played Minecraft for like one weekend, like 10 years ago or something. And the one thing I did is like, you build a house in the beginning to survive the first night. And then I just wanted to like see how high the world went. So I just built like a tower all the way to the limits. And then I got up there and I was like, all right, I beat the game. I don't really want to do anything else. I'm going to turn it off now.
Yeah, I remember talking to my son, and we were him and his buddies played a lot of Minecraft when they were younger. And, it was just funny hearing them go like, we're going to build a city. Like on their phones,
like open-ended.
Yeah, they're like, what are we gonna do? He said, well, I'll take care of the subway system or the train system, and you got to go build it. And they all had these like little jobs, and they were all doing it, and they all had like who's the mayor, and they were like doing all this stuff, and they built this giant city with this whole system, like tram system and everything, and that amount of freedom is amazing to see, and I guess like kind of to your point, like it can feel daunting, like. I was watching them going like, oh, I don't know if I do that with my buddies, but it's daunting. But I think the games that like Minecraft is so open. Mm-hmm. But what I've started to kind of like latch on to are those games like some of Valheim and Shrouded, other games where it's like, well, there's this other overarching thing. There's a villain. There's these like things you can do, these quests to kind of tie you together to some like bigger thing. So your creativity is like funneling towards something. You can kind of see when it can end, Right. I think it helps a lot.
Well, yeah. I mean, another game that I played a bunch of was DayZ, and a lot of that is just the end game there is to fight everyone else on the server. So you're not really spending a bunch of time building a really cool looking base. You're spending a bunch of time building a secure base so you can stockpile enough weapons to fight the other groups on the server. And like you talked earlier about everyone had a job. Like my job in that game was I was the guy who sorted all the inventory. Like everything's in a random, like, no, I'm going in, it's going in special.
Yep.
And as I'm doing this, I'm like, I wonder what this says about me, that this is the most fun I probably had in like the last week.
One time in Valheim, I remember I wanted to expand the base and I took out one plank and all of our chests broke. So there's loot everywhere. And it was like 1 a.m. And I went, oh, shit. And I was like, Okay, so I just had to I had to expand and rebuild everything. I was up to like 4 a.m, and the next day I went to work. I was like, oh my god, this is not a good choice, but I had to do it. But I'm the same too. I like in those games, I like organization, like things to be like. One of our metrics of whether or not we're gonna like a survival crafting game is, do they craft from the chests? If a game does that, I'm like, cool, like thank you. If not, and I gotta have all the mats on me I'm like. No. So like once you craft from the chest, we're like, okay, we're in. We'll play. We played a lot of Conan Exiles too.
I played a lot of that one too. Yeah. Another one again. Just you build such fun bases, but I love the PvE element in that game because there was actual bosses. There were actual boss fights you had to prep for.
Yeah, that was the first one where I felt like we were getting this like an open world survival game was also getting some traditional like, action adventure systems in it where it's like there's quests, there's dungeons, there's like a storyline, there's bosses. They had a good loop. I'm excited to see what they do with speaking of like next year, hopefully it's Dune.
Yeah, I was thinking exactly that one. That one looks interesting, and I mean it's a completely different setting, and it's going to be, I think it'll be a lot of fun because again, Conan Exiles was a lot of fun. They had good systems, they had good content. The boss fights were actually interesting and mechanically they had some stuff to them. So yeah, I mean, a lot of games came out this year. 2024 was a great year. I played a ton of stuff, especially once our game came out. But for me, game of the year is probably Stalker 2. I've been waiting for that game for 15 years, and just the way I felt when I first started playing, and I felt like I'm back in the zone. I'm back in this place that, as terrifying and as awful as it is, feels kind of like home. And it just, I've got 30 hours in it so far, and I'm probably going to times that by 10 by the time I'm done with it. So
it's really kind of hard to pick out one thing. I had played a lot of good things this year, starting with even just like the Elden Ring DLC. I feel like my brain is telling me not to pick that, but my like lizard brain probably like got the most just like raw enjoyment out of that, or is the thing that was like the most alluring and kind of addictive to go to. Other than that, I think Astrobot and then UFO 50 were just like extremely impressive to me for like totally different reasons, but Astrobot is just like extremely focused and just filled with so many creative like game mechanics, and it's all like perfectly polished. And then like UFO 50 also has just a completely ridiculous amount of ideas in it, and but it's in the form of 50 separate games that will probably take you like the rest of your life to play through.
I mean, for my gaming style and what I enjoy, Helldivers 2 is like was what it really I was really engaged in it. I put, I don't know, like over 200 hours into it, like straight. Like I didn't play anything else. It was the perfect game because I'm a social gamer, play with my friends. Like we talked about, taking a sandbox, including cinematic moments, giving you a sense of urgency, making you laugh, being meme worthy, the whole thing, like leaning into its identity. Also, like, I don't know, it's just like when you're at work and you see your coworker, you're like, they kind of give it back to you. And you're like, God, Helldivers 2, man. Like, so yeah, that was my game of the year. Like, I love that game. I haven't played Indiana Jones yet. I hear really good things about it, but yeah, I haven't gotten into it.
I played about 10 minutes of it, and the 10 minutes were fantastic. Plus, it's machine games.
Yeah.
They did the new Wolfensteins, amazing games. I cannot imagine that I will not love this game too.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it. I almost started playing it, but then I was like, I actually want to go back and rewatch all the Indiana Jones movies just so and plan. Appreciate any references they might be dropping. Metaphor, I started a few weeks ago, and I love all the Persona games, and I can already tell it's amazing, and they're doing a lot of cool things to like kind of streamline the combat and the systems. I love when an RPG lets you skip battles if you're like over leveled and the enemy just like runs away, or you like kill them in one hit. I think that's like very respectful of your time. So I got like high hopes for that one. Silent Hill 2, did you guys play that?
I haven't had a chance to. I played the original way back in the day, but I've not played the remake.
Okay, it's pretty good. Played through that. I was kind of honestly very worried about it. I didn't really trust Konami to like treat it with like the respect it deserved, but it really surprised me. The acting in it is excellent. They came up with some really good new puzzles. Just overall, like they nailed the original like tone of the game, but there are some like performance issues that are kind of distracting. Animation can be a little stuttery, so but they got the hard part right, which was like the design and sort of mood.
I always have a soft spot for Prince of Persia games.
Yep.
Sure, yeah.
So, I'm glad to see it on the list. I'm glad to see Prince of Persia still being like a name in games that people talk about.
I remember playing the original Prince of Persia, specifically a demo of it on one of those PC discs where it's like 50 games that you can try, and like I'm like, this is amazing. But yeah, Lost Crown was awesome. I thought they did such a good job with the art style, and just the gameplay was so clean.
Yeah.
I don't think we can go through this without talking about Balatro.
Yeah,
I mean, who would have guessed that? Again, you tell someone the concept of Balatro, and like, okay, that's interesting. You play, and like, I can't stop playing this.
I don't even understand how it works. 'Cause I don't like card games really, and I don't like poker, and I don't have like a love for just gambling or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just stuff I kind of like. I typically avoid, or it doesn't catch my attention. But so I tried playing Balatro just after hearing so much about it, and within like 20 minutes, I was just like completely addicted to it. And then my girlfriend came over like after I'd been in, and I'm like, let me show you how to play Balatro. And I'm like,
Must play this. It's so good. They nailed the core loop of that game. Just feels so good.
Yeah, I think I literally felt like a drug addict for a couple of weeks, where I was like I was just trying to like shift my schedule around, or I'm like, how can I squeeze in more time to play Balatro? And it's a dangerous game, but it's like so smartly designed, and I feel like maybe some people might be reductive, and it's like, oh, it's just about seeing the numbers go up, and that's kind of like triggering this like dopamine release in your brain. But in a way, it's like a game about numbers, especially in the late game where it gets into like scientific notation for your score, which is like really funny.
Oh wow!
It makes you almost think about like just scaling, just as in concept. I'm like, oh well, this set of jokers scales linearly. That's not that good. Or this one scales geometrically, or this one scales exponentially. Everyone's, oh, this is how you really break the game. So wow, it's an amazing game. I think I think it's going to be a classic for a long time.
Did you play Black Myth?
I did play Black Myth. Yeah.
It was interesting. They did some things really, really well, but at the same time, I felt like there was coming off of like with Elden Ring, and then playing that, there was just some things there that I could kind of see a bit of a difference, or like a tightness maybe between the two.
I think one of the things about that game, honestly, is I don't think I think the marketing didn't tell me what the game was actually going to be.
That's a good point.
And I think when you're looking, you're like, okay, it's like an Elden Ring, it's a Souls. You play it, it's like, okay, no, it's really just it's not quite a boss rush game, but it feels a lot like one. Yeah. And when you approach it from that, I think like the gameplay,
it connects, right?
The mechanics, everything is super tight, and the game feels really good. It's just, I think a lot of people kind of went into it expecting something different than what it was. And I mean, let's be honest, that's always the challenge with marketing is sometimes you don't necessarily give people exactly what they're to expect. I think that was, but I mean, I think again, the mechanics and I think first game coming out like of that style was just, they did a really good job with it.
Yeah, I think I kind of fell victim to that because I had just come off of like over 100 hours playing Shadow of the Erdtree.
Yep.
And I'm like, all right, I got my Souls fix, I'm good. And then Black Myth Wukong comes out immediately after that. I'm like, oh, it's another Souls-like game. I'm like, but it's not from FromSoft.
Yeah.
I think
That's a good point.
Pass on this.
That's a good point, though. The expectations, though, right? Like,
and I mean, that's
just like Strush. It's very different.
It would use exactly, and like as that game, it is fantastic. They do. It's fun, and it's really good. It's satisfying, like with any type of game like that, to learn mechanics and get good at the mechanics.
Yes. Yep.
Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I will say, one of my greatest gaming memories, playing Final Fantasy VII, the original, on a PS1 with no memory card, and then dying.
That's such a common story.
To Midgar Zalem, and then having my buddy and I staying up till 5 a.m, and then having to replay the entire game from that point. His dad then bought him a memory card that same day because I think, but yeah, like I liked Rebirth, I liked Remake, I think it's expectations. People were expecting a different story than they got in some cases, and I think whether you love that game or hate that game depends on what you're expecting to come out of it. And I think with the end of Remake, people were expecting a very different game, maybe. But like I went in with zero expectations because I always try to do that with games. I loved it. So
yeah, I am like a victim of my own habits here, where I'm really excited to play Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I haven't played it, and was planning on playing it this whole year, but the way I had to play it was I had to go back and play the original PS1 version fresh, and I hadn't played Remake yet because I still hadn't finished the PS1 run. So I did finish, after probably 4 attempts throughout my whole life, I finally finished the original PS1 Final Fantasy VII this year, and then I finished Remake like 2 days ago, and now I'm set up to play Rebirth next year. So
I had to play. Yeah, I played Remake before I played Rebirth. I'm like, I had beaten it before. I'm like, I need to play this game again.
Yeah.
Well, we have two people here with games.
It's true, yeah.
So you should talk about them.
I mean, yeah, you want to talk about Animal Well?
Yeah.
So I can't say Animal Well was my best game of the year, but I do probably have the most hours in it from developing it. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people seem to really like it, and I'm very flattered and grateful. And yeah, I just appreciate the support from everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, and Dragging You to the Veilguard, again, very flattered to be on this list. People say it's an honor just to be nominated, but it really is. And I mean, having been on this project as long as I was, knowing all the challenges it went through, the fact that it came out at all was a miracle. The fact that it came out and a lot of people really loved it was something more than that. And yeah, I mean, but again, this year was so good. There's games that aren't even on here that I'm like,
oh, I agree.
I'm thinking like, again, Like a Dragon, Infinite Wealth. Fantastic game, loving it. There's so much good stuff that came out in 2024. And it was funny because at the beginning of the year, people were like, "Oh, it's going to be a quiet year for gaming." It's like,
they just came off a crazy.
Yeah, they came off a crazy year. It's like 2020, and it wasn't. It's just another one we didn't even talk about. We talked about it a little bit. You talked about it, Astrobot.
Yes,
such an amazing 3D platformer, so polished, and my 5-year-old and my 9-year-old can play it and have a blast, and I can play it and be challenged. I am going to say whoever invented the level with the lava that you have to cool off with a duck.
Yeah.
I just want to talk to that person and just have a conversation.
Yeah, and it's like so messy. The duck
Yes.
is like,
Yeah,
just kind of goes everywhere, and you're like, how am I supposed to do the precision platforming under this
I
time
finally-
constraint? Well, the duck.
My son learned some interesting words from me while I was trying to beat that for him, that he's not allowed to use the daycare. So
Yeah, and I think like Astrobot just came at like such a good time where I think people were really feeling like burnt and a little bit cynical about like the big, massive budget, like live service game that like is kind of just preying on their time. And it felt like every game was trying to be that in AAA, and Astrobot kind of comes and in a lot of ways just does something very classic and makes like a character platformer, which used to be the AAA game of like the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And it still works. And not every game needs to be like 1,000 people working for 7 years and, cost $500 million to make.
What we got? Legend of Zelda?
I haven't had a chance to play that one.
I haven't either.
So Legend of Zelda, I did play, and I'm just a huge Zelda fan in general. They did, I think, a good job with just the general art in the game. I mean, it uses like the Link's Awakening engine. But also I have a few minor critiques to the game. I think there's like, we were talking about like narrative in games in general, and this is a game where I think it kind of comes in and interrupts the flow because it has a story, but it's kind of basic, and you're like closing up these rifts that are appearing around Hyrule, and maybe it's just I'm like a little too old for it, but they like repeat the fact that you need to close the rifts, like, and the rift is always like highlighted in purple, like to remind you it's like a keyword. And they tell you that probably like 40 times throughout the game. Like and it's like, I know the rifts are open. And
You know what? I'm going to leave it open.
I got to go close them. So that was like a little tedious, but overall it's a Zelda game. It's good.
I mean, that's a pretty high bar.
Yeah,
right.
No,
With Zelda, it's serious. Like,
by just saying it's a Zelda game, like, yes, you should go play it. It's really good. But this was also a crazy year for good games.